Hello, my name is Alfred Ball, and the title of this blog post is Workflow Service Activity with Sessionless Notification. So what we're doing is basically implementing a architecture where we have a workflow service that's hosting a workflow with an activity which has a purpose of calling a service and then listening for notification and then finally a final result. What's different about this and just your regular duplex binding with a callback contract is that it is a sessionless connection as opposed to a session-full connection where you maintain a session through the connection. So the service could live and die many times as long as it called back to the client caller eventually. Then the call would still go through in a sense. So here we have a service. We'll start from the service and then we'll go into see what the client does. I have three different projects here. I have one which is a WCF service library, and I have one to maintain the service contracts as well as the data contracts. I also have one to hold the activity that calls the service, and that's in the operations namespace because I think of it that way. When this is implemented in the client workflow, I think of these types of activities as operations on a contract because that's really just their function, is to be able to call out and receive a call. So I don't want to confuse them with just regular activities within a workflow. Okay, so let's first start with the contract. Here is the service contract, and the operation is one way because we don't have a connection, so it's a fire and forget each time. We pass in a person data contract, which is just the first and last name, so very simple. And this is basically what ties everything together. The callback address needs to be passed in by the client so that the service can know who to call back to. And then for the correlation, we use a data-centric correlation, which is just simply a GUI, which this unique identifier here. So that gets passed in, and then the service uses that to call back to the client. So let's look at the callback. The callback is what the client actually implements. So it's going to be able to receive calls on an operation of send status, and the status data contract is simply just a message, as well as the correlation data piece. And then it will notify the client about 5 times that it's currently processing the request. And then finally it's going to call the send age operation on the client and pass in that age. So let's look at the service. Basically, we're implementing the get age operation. These are the parameters we're expecting, and then we basically just fake processing for about 5 seconds. The last notification that we send is simply something to actually kind of help the architecture a bit, and it's just a message that says I'm finished, which is what qualifies the client to basically know I should stop listening for status information and start expecting the final result, which is going to be returned down here. So basically is we pass in a name and the service says this is the age of that person that you gave me. One thing real quick, I want to go back here about these right here. Actually, using WCF extensibility, you could incorporate this type of architecture directly in an extensibility point so that it comes through like the header instead of actually being part of the contract. And that way you can kind of seamlessly integrate it implicitly into your architecture. So that's something you might want to do. So every time I need to call back, I have to create a channel. I mean, I could have this be not having to initialize this each time I want to call back, but it's not really a big deal right now. Okay, so the service is very simple. Let's look at the operations. So this is the get age operation. So this is going to actually be running inside of the client. So we have our variables and our arguments. So we're going to take in a person, we're going to take in a callback address, so that's going to be specified externally. I mean, you wouldn't want to have that hard coded inside your actual activity. And then our out argument is going to be age. Our variables, we need to have a correlation handle and a unique identifier, which is the value that's set on the correlation handle. So here, as you can see, we're setting the correlation value to this two-string value of the unique identifier. So we're going to be passing this GUID back and forth, because the reason why we need correlation is because a workflow service host could new up multiple instances of the workflow that it processes, and when it receives a call, it needs to know which instance it needs to route that call to. Without that correlation, it doesn't know who to route it to, and you're going to receive an error. So we have our send activity here, which is in the messaging. In your toolbox, you'll see it under the messaging section, and we're going to call the get age operation on the service, and our content looks like this. We have to conform exactly to the signature of the operation. Even the casing, it has to be lowercase in this case to begin with, and this is what we're initializing them to: the person argument that we get in, the callback address, and then the value of the unique identifier. And our endpoint configuration name is personnel service. So this actually needs to be implemented as a client endpoint in the client service. And then our service contract name is iPersonnel Service, and that name just needs to match with the name of the service. So this isn't actually referencing an actual .NET type. The only reason we use .NET types in this architecture to begin with, or in the foundation, is because it's a way to allow us to have type safety. And the data contract class and the service contract class, they just help to be able to serialize that into an appropriate WSDL document. That's pretty much their only purpose. So this should be fine to run on the client once we get over there. Now I want to show you something, how I like to debug over here on this side. I set up in the external tools, I set up the WCF Service host. So you point it to the service host utility, and then you pass in the arguments. Target file name doesn't seem to work, so I combine target name with target extension, and then I point the configuration file as well. Those are the two parameters it needs, and then I specify an initial directory. So let's start that up. Say OK. Now I will show you that it actually is started. So let's go into the app config of the service. So what you see here is the service name. It has to conform to what the class is, and we have a base address. If you're not an administrator, you have to remember to be able to add this, basically register it, or it won't run. Our endpoint just simply has the basic HTTP binding and the contract, fully qualified namespace as well. Our MEX is exposed down here, and this is irrelevant because we don't have a Sessionful connection. So whether or not I set this to true, there's no way to call back to the client using that connection. You wouldn't, if you had a duplex binding along with the data contract, a callback contract specified on your contract here, or a callback contract, then what you would do in your service is, when you're ready to call back, you call the operation context and you say, give me my callback, and it has that Sessionful information in it so that it knows how to call back. In this case we don't, which is why we have to explicitly create that channel each time. Alright, so that should be enough with the service. Let's look at the client. Okay, in the client I actually brought in the operations project because I like to be able to I like to be able to debug on this end the actual activity operation that I'm using to call out. So that's enough of that. The workflow service, client service actually, which looks like this, is it receives, because within a workflow service host, which is how we're hosting this within this throwaway console application project, you can only call it by actually calling it externally as if you were calling a service. I mean, there's a workaround, but this is pretty much how it's out of the box. So we have our receive. You notice we don't have any correlation. There's no need to have any. And we have just we're taking in a person. And the operation is just, as you can see, it's actually not defined anywhere. We're not referencing a .NET type because it's not required. So when you actually create these receive and send activities, well, receive, you're actually creating a contract. I mean, it's literally generated under the hood the same way as it is on the service. So we give it a service contract name of iStart, so that's just very generically defined. Then we come down here into the get age operation. Alright, so that's going to be assigned to the age variable down here. And then we pass in the person value that we get on the initial call. And then we give it the personnel callback address. And then finally we say, okay, I'm going to write out the age of that person. Simple as that. If we go back to the service, oh, I forgot to do something. When we come back up here, in order to debug using this process, we need to actually attach ourselves to the workflow service host. So we'll come in here, personnel service, and we'll just put a breakpoint there. And okay, let's look at the web config of the client. Okay, we have our start endpoint so to receive a call, and we have our personnel callback. So this actually appended down here, up here, is the callback address that we passed, so it makes sense. And then the contract is, notice it's not the fully qualified domain name that we actually have on the service in the contracts. It's just that the names need to match and the operations need to match, and then we're fine. We have max, and then here's our client endpoint, so that the age activity using the using the personnel service endpoint with this main will be able to find what information it needs to be able to call the service. Alright, let's go into the console application, see what we're dealing with. We're going to new up a workflow service host, and using XAML services static class, we're going to point it to where the client lives, and we'll get it that way. If you're hosting an IIS, of course you don't need to do it this way. I like to actually print out the endpoints of the service so that I can tell that it's running. So let's go ahead and we'll start this up. Okay, and then we'll bring in WCF test client into the picture, and we'll point that to the client, and I'll show you client right now. This is what it looks like. So we printed out the endpoints, and then we'll call the start operation on it. We'll put in my name since that's what the service is kind of expecting, and we'll invoke that one-way message, of course. So get that out of the picture, and now we can debug in the get age. So we're going to set the age, or we're going to call the get age operation. Okay, we'll let that fly. Now we're within it, and so we're going to call get age, and we received our first status. So actually here on the service, well, for some reason we're not getting through to the debugging. But, you know, let's skip that. Well, we could figure it out. I think it probably has something to do with the way that the service is being hosted. It was working a while ago, so I can guarantee that it does work. And so we received our first send status, and let's just keep going until we get to the receive here. So we can see it happening over here. The service is actually calling back, sending status notification, and it send the I'm finished message, so then that allows us to continue going to the receive. And finally we write out the last message, which is Alfred Ball is 27 years old. There you go. Okay, thanks for watching.